Hello and welcome to Transplant's Take on Sport. My name's Lewis Daniels and joining me today is two-time kidney transplant recipient and climber, mountaineer and runner, Tara Bashford. Tara is incredibly determined and talks through her traumatic transplant experience, trekking across mountains around the world, her impressive fundraising efforts and her love of cake. I think that, like me, you'll take a lot from Tara's experiences, as her story really is inspirational. If you're enjoying the podcast, then please make sure you subscribe or follow wherever you normally get your podcasts. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, it would mean a huge amount to me if you could rate the podcast 5 stars on the show page to help more people see it. And if you'd like to follow the podcast on social media, all the links will be in the show notes. Tara Bashford, welcome to Transplant's Take on Sport.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's good to be here.
It's good to have you on. I think you were the first person that I ever met with a transplant, knowingly met with a transplant, once I found out I needed mine.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. That's quite cool, actually.
I think it was that day, I think you were setting up Camkin, which we'll come on to later on, and I'd been told by the living donor coordinator to come along because he's generally in waiting rooms. I don't know if you agree with me on this one or not. When you sat in transplant clinic waiting rooms, you're generally surrounded by people older than we are, let's say.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can be really intimidating when you first go in and you look around and you go, I see nobody under the age of 50 right now. And when you do see a young person, you kind of pounce on them and you want to just be their friend and kind of chat about it all. So yeah, I get that.
So speaking of us both having transplants, and I noticed that, in my mind, I was about 6 months before transplant, I think. It was, people my age with a transplant do just go on and live a life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it needs to be seen like that. Yeah, it can be a long process, and for some people it can be a long recovery and it can be tricky. But at the end of the day, you've been given this wonderful gift in whatever way it's been given to you, whether that's a living donor or a deceased donor. And I think that you should kind of do it justice in a way. And that means, there are some restrictions, about taking all of your drugs and maybe you have to avoid certain things. But generally, you need to go and live a normal life. Otherwise, what is the point of going through it all?
Yeah. And we've both been through it. Let's go right back to the start. When did you first find out that you had kidney problems?
So I was in the second year of college, and I went for my tonsils out. Funny enough, and running up to it, they were like, "Your blood pressure's a bit high. You must just be nervous." And I was like, "Yeah, whatever." I'd have had operations before, so I knew it wasn't the process. I couldn't understand it either. I didn't even think anything of it. Gets to the day of surgery. Oh, your blood pressure's still quite high. We're gonna have to speak to the anaesthetist. Gets on the anaesthetist table, and my blood pressure was insane. It was like 200 over 160, which for anybody that is not familiar with blood pressure, it's quite a number. And they just kind of brushed it off a little bit. They were just kind of like, it might be you're just nervous or anxious, or you just need to chill a little bit. Maybe go and see a GP if you're worried and stuff. And I was really, really, really angry that they cancelled my tonsillectomy because I was suffering so badly and it was affecting college work. And I took time off from college and I took time off from work. And my dad dragged me to the doctors. He was like, "There's obviously something up because no one has a blood pressure like that." And he was right. So my GP did bloods, and 2 days later, I was in the Royal for a week-long stay. And in that time, they did every test under the sun, including a biopsy. And I didn't find out what was wrong with me for months. So I was 18 at this point, because they had to do multiple biopsies. And when it actually got down to it, it was probably about 3 months after that initial kind of meeting with the renal team at the Royal, they actually found out what was up. And they just kind of said, "Well, your kidneys function about 28%. We think you have this disease called IgA nephropathy, but it's kind of inconclusive from the samples, but that's what we're kind of going with. That's our best idea from what we have seen. And you'll probably need 50% needing a transplant in the next 5 to 10 years. And I was gobsmacked. I was absolutely gobsmacked because up until that point, I'd been kept in the dark, really. All that was said to me was, "Oh, there's something wrong with your kidneys. We're not quite sure what it is," and that was it. And that was the line given to me for 3 months. So I thought, "Oh, I've had an infection somewhere along the line. Maybe a bit of scarring. Might be like slightly reduced function." I did not expect the bombshell that was kind of thrown at me when I went in that day to the consultant's office, and I was just kind of, yeah, all the way home, I was just kind of gobsmacked. And I was like, might need a transplant. I was like, no, I won't need a transplant, be fine. Um, but yeah, so that was kind of where the whole thing started for me. And I was very much in denial. Like, I was very much in denial for a while. And even though it was, yeah, I didn't deal with it very well. It was a bit a case of kind of being really angry. I kind of thought about my life in the future. I didn't know anything about it really. Um, and I could see it playing out, and I wasn't going to be able to travel properly. And, how is this going to affect me? And I knew nothing. Like, I actually knew nothing. And I walked out that day not really knowing much more than when I went in through the front door, except that now I had a diagnosis. So it's slightly relieving that I did have a diagnosis, but at the same time, I didn't have a clue. I honestly didn't have a clue what was in store.
It's hard when you hear that news as well, and they come out with the line, "You're going to need a transplant in however long." It sounds very similar to mine. The same condition, the same process going in with biopsies, and just thinking or knowing there's something wrong with your kidneys. We're not quite sure what. I was telling myself that it was just going to be a water infection. Dr. Google said it's not a water infection, it's IgA nephropathy. But then when you are told you're going to need a transplant in you said 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, 50% chance of 5 to 10 years. Yeah.
Yeah, mine was 10, the initial one. But just before that, it was you'll probably be able to stay stable with the medication we're giving you for a number of years.
Yeah.
And suddenly it was 10, a few months after 5, 1, 6 months now.
Yeah,
Did it
absolutely.
go that quick for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was when I was 18, and by 19, they talked about activating me on the transplant list, and by 20, I was getting ready for a transplant. So yeah, it absolutely plummeted. And much like you, we were probably on the same medication, Ramipril or some sort of ACE inhibitor,
Yeah.
which for people that are listening that don't know, it's proven to slow down the progression of things like IgA nephropathy, which is a really common type of glomerular nephritis. It's just scarring of the kidneys, and there is a good prognosis for it, but it seems like after you get to a certain point, you're kind of in quote marks too far gone, to kind of save it. So yeah, absolutely the same as you, just deteriorated really quickly. And I remember over 3 months, I dropped from 16% to 6. And it was just, yeah, it was constantly in and out of the hospital and the doctors.
And so at that point, when you got down to 6, did you have to go on dialysis from then?
So the plan was for me to have a preemptive transplant, so a transplant before I hit dialysis from my dad. And it was all lined up, and it was going to be perfect. I was going to have the transplant in the September on the 21st and not need dialysis. 2 weeks before I goes into clinic, or 3 weeks before I went into clinic, and my potassium was quite high. And obviously high potassium can be deadly. You can have heart attacks, and it can be really, really bad. So they started me on dialysis through an emergency neckline. So I didn't get away with it. I had to do 3 weeks worth of dialysis before my preemptive transplant, but it didn't matter anyway because the transplant wasn't successful.
We'll come on to that now, if that's all right. So your dad donated. You were 20. How long did it last?
So I went down to theatre at 1 p.m. on the 21st of September, and at 3 in the morning, I was hemorrhaging. My potassium was 7.5.
That's high for anyone who isn't aware.
That's like, yeah, I've never beaten it, I don't think. I've never beaten that high score of potassium. So they stuck me on dialysis as soon as it had come down to a sensible level. They rushed me to theatre to fix the bleed. Um, they were happy. I came back, and from that point, something had gone wrong, and I was in the most phenomenal pain. It's indescribable. Like, when we talk about the pain scale for any patient, it goes from 1 to 10. 1 is like, oh, I've just bumped my shoulder into the door. It doesn't really hurt. It was just stupid. 5 is like, oh God, I've just stood on a plug with some Lego on top of it. And then 10 is the most unbearable pain. For me, 10 is you would rather someone put you out your misery than carry on with the pain. That's how I describe a pain 10. And it was a solid 10 for about 15 hours. And they found a clot. They found a clot in the kidney. And they said to me, clots like this we don't often save it. It's going to have to be an exploratory surgery. You might lose the transplant. But I was too unstable to go to theatre. I had to dialyse. So I was left in that pain, and no pain medication they gave me was even close to touching it. And I remember begging them and begging them and begging them for more pain relief, and there was just nothing else. And I just wanted it out, or I wanted to just kind of give up the ghost. And I went down to theatre, and I thought, even in my head, I was like, they'll fix it, it's fine. I didn't even consider losing the transplant, not at all. And when I woke up, the anaesthetist came over, and even in my drugged up, anaesthetized, kind of weary state, I remember him saying, we took the kidney out. And again, that same gobsmacked feeling, like I had no emotion at this point because I just couldn't comprehend it. I was like, what do you mean you've taken out the kidney? It's like there was a clot in it. It was destroyed. It was broken. And I just kept going back to the surgeon after the transplant, and him going, it's an amazing kidney. It's going to last you 22, 25 years. You know, it's phenomenal. It's incredible. Just being generally really excited. And then now this man was coming up to me and going, actually, no, it's in the waste disposal bin. We're really sorry. And then for anybody that's ever had, I don't want this to sound ridiculous, but I mourned the loss of that transplant because I mourned those 22 years. I mourned those 30 years that I was going to have from that transplant. And my dad was devastated, absolutely devastated. And I remember walking into the lobby of the Royal, because you still have to recover. You know, you've just had major surgery. I had
Yeah.
3 major surgeries, and you still have to recover. And I had a bag of drugs, and I was in incredible pain, and I had nothing to show for it. I had nothing, and I had a dialysis slot for 2 days later. And that was my first transplant. It was a nightmare. It was an actual nightmare, and it took me years to be able to talk about it.
How do you pick yourself up from that point when you've, as you said, you've been promised, or not promised, but you're building up this next 20, 30 years, and then pretty much instantly after it's gone? How do you and your dad pick yourself up?
I don't even know if I'm at that point still. Sometimes, like, I think because now I've got a successful transplant, it's a little bit easier. But I was so devastated. I was literally like mourning the loss. I don't know what it's like to lose a child. I honestly don't. But I mourned it like I'd lost something so very dear to me. And going into dialysis was weird because I'd done 3 weeks, so I had a slot, and I got familiar with some of the people there, as you would, because you go in, 3 times a week. Why are you here? You're supposed to have a transplant, and then you have to explain to every single
Yeah.
person you see why you're there again and what happened. And for most people, they understand and they go, "Do you know what? That is horrific." I think the more devastating thing was the pain that I went through, as well as losing the transplant. Like, when I think about the agony I was in, it sometimes I can't even comprehend it. It was insane. And then obviously then losing the transplant and seeing my dad afterwards was heartbreaking because he doesn't it's no one's fault. It was an act of God. It was 1% out of transplants it happens to. But I was 20. I was fit. I was healthy. I was a climber. I ran. I worked outside. I had no other comorbidities. I'd looked after myself, and yet this just happens. And I couldn't understand it, and it was really, really difficult. But I think that for me, getting involved in the kidney stuff, I got involved in the volunteering, the fundraising, the shared care, speaking to other patients gave me a focus. It gave me something to work towards. It kind of, things can always be worse. That is kind of what I try to repeat to myself. Whatever position you're in, if you're alive, things can usually always be worse. Um, and it took me a while, but I did pick myself back up. I dealt with it a lot better than I dealt with dealing with my diagnosis. I think because I was older and I was a little bit more experienced, and a little bit more mature. And yeah, I was had to be strong for the people around me as well, because this doesn't just affect you; it affects everybody that you're in contact with and that and that look after you.
Everyone else goes through it at the same time as you are indirectly
Yeah.
through knowing you. Seeing you go through it can't be easy for those around you.
No, absolutely not. And after that point, things didn't get much better. I had a really tricky dialysis. My dialysis failed on multiple occasions. I spent over 250 days in hospital, over a year. Um, at one point there was no dialysis that was working. And I ended up being tubed. I ended up being in ITU, with seizures and blood pressure that just was trying to kill me. Um, and it didn't look good for a while. And there was points in my life where I was so anemic. For any kidney patient, I had a hemoglobin of 42. So the normal range for a woman is between 120 and 135. Anything below 80, they give you a blood transfusion. And anything below 60, they call it critical. So I was at 42. Um, and I said, if I get below 40, I'll accept a blood transfusion. But obviously, that increases the antibodies, and less likely you get a transplant, is the easiest way to describe it. So I was holding out, and I had to use a wheelchair. I couldn't stand up. I couldn't walk up the stairs without help. My dad had to push me up the stairs or carry me up the stairs. I couldn't brush my teeth. I couldn't do anything. I was just resigned to a wheelchair.
Just from the anemia.
Just from the anemia, just because I couldn't perfuse my muscles, my organs well enough. And it did come back up, and it was fine. But there was some real low points. Um, but you just keep going, and you can't deal with things as they happen. Like, mentally, you can't deal with things, because that means you'll have to stop, and that's when you get caught up in it all. You have to just keep moving forward and eventually go, right, I will deal with this at some point, but I can't do it now because I have to just keep going. I don't want to like make this sound like it's like kidney disease for is such an individual thing, like from person to person. Some people have a really easy transition to dialysis and transplant, and or maybe even never have to dialyze. And then other people are just the opposite end of the spectrum, and then you've got everybody in between. So you can't. This is why patients really struggle. There is not one size fits all with anything related to your kidneys.
Just from what you've been saying there, we said we were similar going up to the transplant, but then from the first transplant surgery, it's completely opposite.
Yeah, absolutely.
Listening to other people telling their stories on here, I've realised how straightforward mine was.
And yeah, absolutely. And do you know what? I wouldn't wish it on anybody. I wouldn't wish it on anybody, but at the same time, I say this and people think I'm weird, but I would not change it. I honestly wouldn't change it, because it's made me who I am. It's made me appreciate like what I've got now. It opened my eyes to what I did and didn't want from life, and that life is too short. Like, and that's what changed. That's what the switch that kind of flipped from dealing with my diagnosis to dealing with the failure of my second transplant and everything surpassing that was you know, just that mindset had to change, because woe is me does not get you anywhere. Like, the world is ending, my life is terrible, doesn't get you anywhere. And everybody goes through it. I kind of think you have to hit that low, and then realize, actually, do you know what? Right, I need to sort my life out now. And people do that in different ways. And for me, most of it was getting involved in the patient stuff, and thinking about what I was going to do when I eventually got my life back.
Let's go on to your second transplant, which did come
Finally.
eventually. How long were you on dialysis for between the first and the second?
I think I was on for about a year. It felt very much longer, but it was about a year. So I used to dialyse in hospital on a home dialysis machine 5 days a week. So it used to take me an hour and a bit in rush hour traffic into Liverpool. I'd do my own dialysis, everything myself, for 3 hours, 2 to 3 hours. And then I would wait for transport for 90 minutes sometimes, and then I would get an hour taxi home. And that was my life 5 days a week. And I thought of it like a working job. It was like going to work. I'd leave the house at 6 in the morning and I'd get back for about 2 p.m. And that was my job, was staying alive. And I did that particular dialysis for 8 months, and then before that, messed around with PD, which was a complete and utter disaster for me. But yeah, so I settled on that routine, that home dialysis, the next stage machine, for that 8 months, and I was really settled on it. But I was too anemic to be put on the list. I wasn't on the transplant list for months. I didn't make it onto the transplant list for more than 2 weeks. So I was in the pooled pair scheme, and for anybody that doesn't know, the pooled pair scheme is essentially a bathtub, hypothetically, of patients that and their family want to donate to them, or their friends want to donate to them, but they're not a match. So they go into this big pool, and then a really clever computer algorithm pairs them all together, and you get chains of donation. In this country, the biggest chain is kind of like 3 sets of couples. So my stepmom wanted to donate to me, but she wasn't a match. I could have accepted that kidney, and I nearly had to, because I was deteriorating so rapidly. But it wasn't a good match, and that comes with its own problems. But I managed to hold out for a match in the pooled pair scheme. I had one failed match and one successful. And the second one, I didn't tell anybody about. I told the staff that knew me, and I told a select number of family members. I didn't post it anywhere. I wasn't really posting a lot about my illness on social media anyway, because nobody wants to see that. I definitely didn't want a record of it. After my transplant and stuff, I'd tell people, I had a transplant, I lost the transplant, I had a transplant, it succeeded. So yeah, so the date came, and I didn't find out that it was fully go ahead until 2 in the morning in the hospital. So I was in the night before, obviously, and I was wandering around the hospital like I usually do when I can't sleep. I was up and down the corridors and up and down the stairs, and I'd just go out to the lobby and just chat to the security guards, and I bumped into my surgeon. He was like, "What are you doing up? Go to bed." He was like, "It's going ahead, everything's all right." I was like, "Okay." So yeah, and I nearly lost that transplant again. I had a massive hemorrhage.
Was that something you were scared about from the start?
I was scared about the pain. I was scared about being in the same amount of pain as I was in last time. And we had extensive chats with the anaesthetist about it. And he was a lovely man. And they switched all my pain medication, because I'm quite resistant to quite a lot of it now, as you can imagine. And I come back from surgery, and I felt great after surgery. There's photos of me, and I look like I've just gone for, a wee walk around the block and needed to lie down. I looked good. I felt good, even though I was a bit tired. And then the next day, I just was like, something's not right. I feel terrible. Something's really not right. And the blood pressure tanked, and I was in horrendous pain. I was, again, the same pain, but I could control it this time. It was horrendous. It was still a 10. I was still begging for more pain relief, but I knew that eventually it would end. And I remember the anaesthetist, they took me down to scan and they found this massive bleed from the kidney. Had 4 transfusions. I had 4 pints of blood. And I remember the anaesthetist coming to me before taking me to theatre and was like, the odds aren't good. You might not survive this one. And at that point, you just don't care. You're in so much pain that you don't care. You don't take anything in. You're just like, just do whatever you needed to do. I had my dad by me this time, so he got to see the whole drama. My stepmom was in the ward, so the roles had been switched. Last time she looked after me for my first transplant, and she had to witness it, whereas this time it had switched, and my dad had to endure it instead. And my mum and my grandma as well. And yeah, it was horrendous. But this time, rather than 16 hours, it was only a few hours. And they took me down to theatre, and I did wake up, and I woke up in ITU, and I was in ITU for 5 or 6 days. And I don't remember any of it. I remember falling asleep holding like a glass of water in my hand. People would have to. I'd fall asleep mid-conversation. I remember the consultant coming in, and I remember the first sentence, and then I must have just fallen asleep and things like that. I would just. It was a really strange time. Like most of the time, I was just asleep. But yeah, and the kidney went to sleep, but it did wake up, and I think that I only have 28% function now, so I've got the same function now as I did when I was diagnosed. And I think that's probably why, because it got such a savage introduction to life. It's like, oh, welcome to Tara's body, here's your roller coaster ride. But it did, it made it through, and it's still going now, and it hasn't really changed. It's 2-year anniversary this week of my transplant.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. I can't believe we've made it this far. But yeah, and it's not something that I didn't think I'd see the second anniversary of this one, actually. But yeah, so it nearly went pear-shaped again. And I just couldn't believe it. I'm like, what are the odds? What are the actual odds? But it was rescued and it was saved. And when I went home with my proud little kidney rather than just a bag of drugs and a really broken heart. And then recovery was so easy for me. I was in hospital for 2.5 weeks. So there was like people coming in, having transplants and going home, and I was still there. Like, there was a woman opposite me, and she was like 68, and she had a transplant. She walked out the door with a function of 73%, 5 days after her transplant. And I'm still sat there like, is it my turn now? And eventually I got out the door, and I remember going for my first climb, surgeon permission granted, about 5 weeks after my transplant. I was fine. It was literally like nothing had happened. It was great.
It must have been such a relief when you did get out of the hospital and it was still working. Did you know who the other person in your paired scheme was?
No, so it's completely anonymous. It's completely anonymous, and it stops things like bribery and all that kind of rubbish. And also, some people just don't want to know. I know that it was a guy. It was a man's kidney, which is always better because it's bigger, especially when you're a female. I know it was a man's kidney, and it was a 50% match, which is good. And yeah, so I got his kidney, and it was a 3-person chain, so it was a big chain. So there's always they're very volatile. They can collapse. If someone gets a cold on the day of surgery, it's cancelled. If someone's not very well, it's cancelled. If there's not a theatre available, it's cancelled. So that's why I didn't tell anybody. That's why I didn't believe it was going to happen until I was on the operating table with my 4 hairnets on when I had dreadlocks. So yeah, and so I have no idea who it was. I sent him a letter. I wrote to him to thank him. He never replied, and that's absolutely fine. But I just wanted him to know that I was going to use it. I was going to look after it, and he'd done an incredible, incredible thing. And whoever his pair was, they got a kidney as well. Everybody in the chain had a successful transplant.
That's exactly how you want it to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned the climbing that you managed to do 5 weeks after your transplant. Which sports or activities were you doing before, and how did did you manage to get close to your first transplant? And from what you've said, I'm guessing you maybe didn't get close to doing any sort of sports between your first and second.
Yeah, so I started climbing when I was 8 years old, so that's like a really, really long time ago now. What, 16 years or something like that. And I climbed consecutively for a lot of years, and then I got injured, and it was more sporadic. And when I went to uni, I got really back into it and started heading into the mountains um, and stuff like that. And I don't think I noticed too much with my native kidneys deteriorating. Um, and I was still trying to do as much as I possibly could, and I felt okay. Like I felt okay, even at 6%. Like I knew something was wrong. I think when you're a patient, you become very in touch with your body and how it feels and what's right and what's wrong.
Yeah.
Um, and I knew, you know, I felt like the tank was running on empty. Um, and then, yeah, between the first and second, I think I went climbing a handful of times, but I couldn't stand up without wanting to pass out most of the time. Um, and it was really hard. I'd pay to go, but I'd more pay to go for the social aspect of it. Because I'd go with my friends and I'd maybe do a couple of climbs, and just sit and chat for the rest of it. And that was enough. That was enough for me. I couldn't really do anything else. I could bear, like, for periods of it, I couldn't even walk properly. Um, so climbing and being out in the hills was my main sports. That's what I'd always kind of done, with breaks in between. When I was younger, I wanted to be an Olympic swimmer, and then realized that actually that's really hard work. And I wasn't very good at swimming either. But yeah, the climbing really, and it will always be my sport. It's something that stayed with me forever. Um, and then after this transplant, that was it. I was off like a rocket. I was climbing again. I spent 4 months in Spain climbing, with my partner, Chris. I was back in the hills. I could walk up hills. I remember one time taking my peritoneal dialysis to Wales with me to visit some friends, because I was on the bags. Which, for anybody that has no idea what I'm talking about, you put bags into your stomach and you drain it out again, and that's your dialysis. And it's, in quote marks, portable, but you take 4 bags a day and they each weigh 2 kilos, so it's not really portable. But I'd gone up to Wales, and my friends were like, "Oh, should we go for a little walk?" And we'll go up this little tiny hill, like not a mountain. It was like, maybe a 30-minute walk. And I remember feeling like I was actually going to die. I thought, this is it. This is it for me. I can't do this anymore. And I'd never felt so rough. And there's a photo of me, and I look like I'd been hit with a baseball bat multiple times in the face. Um, and then now, with my transplant, I run up hills. Do you know, it's insane, the difference that a measly 28% kidney function can make.
It's much better than what you're on before. I think when you are lower down, you'll notice that big jump. 6 to 28 is a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Someone fully healthy uh, maybe would notice the drop from maximum down to 28,
Hmm.
but you've gone from 6 up to 28,
Yeah.
so you're going to feel a lot better on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always think to myself, I'm like, I wonder what it's like to have 100% kidney function. Like, what would I feel like? Would I feel like nuclear? Would I be like a superhero? Um, because, but for the past, several years, 6, 7 years, this is this is the best I've ever had it. Obviously I had good kidney function previous to that, but there's no comparison really. So compared to how I felt when I was on dialysis, which was awful, I feel superhuman. Um, it's insane, and I will never ever let it stop me. 28% or not, like, I'm gonna go out and do it. And you know, it's I don't worry about it. I know that people get really worried about traveling and getting ill and and the drugs they take and stuff, but you can't control those things, especially like the medication you take. I take a truckload, and some of them, have some scary side effects, because you've got less of an immune system. So things like cancer and stuff like that can be more prevalent. But you can't control that. You can't control the ifs, buts, whys, and whens. So you may as well just keep plowing forward. And yeah, it's great. It's unbelievable. It's really unbelievable.
So with the climbing, how did you originally get into that, and did it start indoors?
Yeah, so it started at Alton Towers when I was about 7. There was one of those temporary towers that you
Mhm.
see, and I whizzed up it, and I loved it, and it was great. And my dad was there, and he booked me in for climbing sessions for kids club, and I went every Saturday to kids club, and it was great. I loved it. I loved climbing. It's what I lived for, and I tried the competitions, and it wasn't for me. I'm quite easygoing and stuff like that, um and it was quite stressful. So it was very much my own personal thing. When I was injured, I then took up ice skating. I did that for a few years. 6 a.m., 5 a.m. on a Saturday morning, sometimes in the week as well. Again, very leisurely. Um, and yeah, so the climbing started indoors, and I literally climbed indoors. I'd never been outside until I went to uni. And that's how I met Chris. Like we were just friends, and he took me out climbing, and he showed me how to climb outside, and we kind of worked in the same place and stuff. Lived completely different lives. Lived different lives for 4 years, um, and then only got together, a couple of years ago and stuff. Um, but yeah, so I only started climbing outside 5 years ago ish. And it's completely different. I love indoors. I love outdoors. It's brilliant. It's a feeling that you don't get from many other things at all.
On the cliffs when you are outside, do you enjoy the risk and the adrenaline rush that you get from it?
Oh yeah, it's scary. It depends what you're doing as well. Like there's lots of different climbing outside. The three main ones are bouldering, so no ropes, just a mat underneath you. Sport climbing, where you've got metal clips, metal bolts in the wall that are drilled into the rock, and you put clips into them and clip your rope in. So the bolts are in there, and then you've got trad climbing, where you have to place your own protection as you climb. Trad climbing is terrifying. It's truly, truly terrifying, um, because you're placing your own gear, and you've just got to trust the fact that if you fall, that gear is going to take your weight. It's not going to pop out, and you're not going to hit the deck. Sport climbing, particularly in like Europe, you get some cracking spaces between the bolts, so you can take some serious falls climbing. And you get to a clip, and your arm's shaking, and you're tired, and you've got to grab the rope, and you've got to put it through that clip. And there's been times where I've had mouthfuls of rope pulling up the rope, and it's been so close to falling off. And you're looking at like, a 10 meter fall, and the sweat is pouring off you, and the adrenaline's going, and like you just can't describe it. And then bouldering, although it's low and there's a mat underneath you, if you're doing some really sketchy moves, you play it out in your brain. You're like, oh my God, I'm going to break a foot. I'm going to break a limb. I'm going to smash my head across a rock. And it's a very big mental game. And, getting past that mental side of it then makes you an incredible climber. But most climbers are limited by their own fear. And that's what I love about it. It's about pushing yourself mentally as well as physically. You don't have to do a hard climb to feel terrified, to feel absolutely stricken with fear.
So climbing, you also do mountaineering.
Yeah.
We had a bit of a chat beforehand. For those who might not be aware, what is the difference between mountaineering and climbing, and do they help each other in a way?
Yeah, so for me, mountaineering would describe being out in the mountains. That might be scrambling, so easy climbing. Like when you see really jagged cliffs on mountains and stuff, not all of that requires a rope. It might just require some competent low level climbing. Um, and just being out in the hills, navigating. Then you obviously got your winter mountaineering, and that might be just trudging through the snow, or it might be using an axe to walk with, or it might be using axes to climb with. So it covers quite a breadth of it. And then obviously for me, climbing means you're scaling it vertically. And usually you've probably got a rope with you, or you're bouldering. So yeah, that's the kind of difference. I think for most people, how most people would describe it. Being out in the hills is great, and it doesn't have to be a big glorious day out. It can just be, I'm just going to wander up this really easy hill for the day and have a picnic at the top and come back down. Or it might be an absolute trek. It might be an absolute mission. You might be trying to cover a really big distance with lots of elevation gain, particularly in places like North Wales, where you can make really long routes like the Snowdon Horseshoe and stuff like that. But yeah, it's just about getting out into the mountains and loving it, really.
It must be relaxing because just even being outside in some fields is good for clearing your head. But when you're that far, presumably away from people, unless everyone's had the same idea, we're in lockdown. Let's go and climb a mountain.
Yeah, absolutely. And you find a lot of that, but obviously, with lockdown now, you can't travel that far, so people can't get out as much. So we've not been in the hills for a long time. Like we were in Scotland, and then when lockdown came, we had to move, because there was no work anymore. But yeah, but at the start, there's a massive increase in numbers. And you've got to be careful as well. If you're going out into the hills during lockdown, if it's local to you, your walking distance and stuff, you've still got to be really careful because anything can happen. And, especially if you're inexperienced and you're taking the dog out and it's, 8 feet of snow and it's a wind chill of, -15, that's a really silly idea because then if you get stuck, you're putting pressure on other services and stuff. Um, but yeah, the it's nice to see people getting out and stuff, but there are still a lot of places that are secluded. Like if you think about Snowdon as a massive tourist trap, sometimes you've got people queuing for the summit, but then you go around the corner to the Glidders or um, to like Molelia or something like that, and there's just no one there. It's completely secluded. So there's always secluded spots wherever you are.
You see those pictures of Snowden, I think it was last March, April, and you go, oh no.
Yeah.
Why have you all done that?
Absolutely. And the cars queuing up the road to Snowdon Penny Pass. It's a nightmare. And people don't think, like, I've been out before in the snow and you see photos of people walking their dogs in this knee deep snow in their Nike trainers and their, just about waterproof jacket, and your heart breaks a little bit. But yeah, the mountains should be for everybody if you've got the common sense to get yourself back up and down.
When you're out for a day, what would you take on a typical trip?
In the summer, if the weather's good, and I check the Met Office and check the local weather services and stuff, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be a good day. I'd take my first aid kit. I'd take some sort of group shelter, just in case it really hit the fan. You always want to prepare for what might happen. I'd take my waterproofs, even if there was not a cloud in the sky. I would take my waterproofs. Snacks, obviously. Water, lots of it if it's going to be really hot. Sunscreen, things like that. Hat, gloves, obviously not as necessary in the summer, but it can change really fast, and especially like temperatures on the summit and stuff. It might be really warm and stuff at sea level, and then you get 1,000 meters up, and suddenly actually that wind's really, really cold.
Yeah.
You're a t-shirt and shorts, and you're like, oh dear. And have a contingency plan. Always leave a flight plan as well. If you're going out, you're letting people know where you're going. You take your phone. If you've got like a personal GPS, then take that too, and just be prepared. Like there's lots of kit lists online and stuff that are really helpful too, and lots of articles on the BMC about staying safe in the mountains. And then if it's winter, you basically pack everything in the kitchen sink. Um, multiple pairs of gloves. You're taking your crampons and your axes, and you just never know what conditions are going to be like. You've taken 17 coats and 4 jackets and 3 hats and everything. Especially for me because I get really cold. And just always thinking about what could go wrong. Is the best way to do it. Is this a good idea? If it's not, I probably shouldn't do it.
Absolutely. And do you think you've got better at preparing for all eventualities since you've became an outdoor instructor?
Yeah, so definitely, and it makes you think of risk in a different way as well. So I've done my mountain leader training. I had my assessment planned, but obviously Rona. I've done my rock climbing instructor assessment, so I can take groups climbing outside. And you do everything you do. You go and double and you triple check it and you quadruple check it, and only when you're a kid, you don't care. Risk is not a thing. Like skipping quick draws, or like just speeding up walls and, just having a quick glance at your knot and not even just, you're a kid. Risk isn't a thing. And then as an adult, it's completely the opposite. You check your knot 16 times, even though you've been doing it every day of your life for the last 16 years. You check your belay partner's belay device 16 times because you're not quite sure if they've done that gate up. And, everything you double check and you triple check, especially once you become an instructor, because it's like ingrained in your brain that people are generally like, you just miss things. You do miss things, and that's how accidents happen. So yeah, definitely. And that's where the fear comes in. That's why people tend to like not climb as hard, because that perception of risk gets bigger.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what's sort of the greatest height you've climbed or mountain you've climbed?
I think my tallest mountain was in Jordan, in the Middle East. So it was Jebel Rum. So that's the highest. It was the highest mountain. Um, it is the highest mountain in Jordan. I think, if I remember rightly, and it's the highest thing I've ever been up. And I think it's about 2,000. It's over 2,000 meters. I think I would have to check that. Um, and it's a lot of scrambling, so it's not just a simple walk up, and then you have to abseil down. The quick way is to abseil down. Um, and the problem with the rock in Jordan is it's sandstone, so it crumbles. So you can grab onto something, it will disintegrate in your hand, and it's terrifying. I have never been so scared. Not on that hill particularly, but climbing in Jordan was truly, truly character building in every aspect of the word. Like, one thing you'd grab onto and be fine, the next person grabs onto it and it falls off. So you have to be so careful. You have to go with a serious knowledge of the rock and the conditions to be able to climb on it. Because you could set up an abseil, so coming down the mountain on a bit of rope, that in the UK would hold a forklift truck. You could go to Jordan and do the same abseil on the sandstone and it would disintegrate. And climbers have died over there from rock that crumbles, and it weighs heavy on your mind. But yeah, you've just got to go with your wits about you. So Jebel Rum, I've just googled just so that I don't sound like a complete idiot, is 1,734 meters above sea level. So it's Snowdon and a half.
It's quite high then.
Yeah, it's really good actually. It's a beautiful, beautiful mountain, um, and it comes from. Best place to start it is in Wadi Rum. Um, yeah, it's really beautiful. I think it was the highest mountain, but then they moved the border. Um, so it's no longer anymore the highest mountain in Jordan, something like that. But yeah, it's fantastic. I've been up Terminillo in Italy. I think that might be taller, to be honest, but you start from quite a high elevation already, so you don't climb the full height
Yeah.
of it. You only end up climbing about 700 meters. Um, I've been to the top of Machu Picchu in Peru. So that's quite high. That's like 4,500 meters. And you feel the altitude there, but unfortunately I couldn't climb it. I couldn't walk up it. I was ill at the time, so I got a minibus up there. Definitely cheating. But yeah, I still got up there eventually by wheels. But in terms of actually rock climbing, I think my biggest climb was in Spain, Blue Line, which is a really, really easy climb. Me and Chris did it together, and we didn't use ropes. We had a rope between us, but we weren't climbing the pitches as you would usually climb. So basically, don't fall off. But it is quite an easy climb, and it's over 300 meters of climbing. So really, really good fun, and we did it at night, and it was awesome. It was brilliant.
Behind you on that, is it just open space to fall into?
Yeah. So we've done it. I think we did it at night, and I think we did it in the day as well. And the exposure is incredible. Like, you'll be just on this ledge, and we've just got a rope between us, and you look down and you're like, oh, that's gonna really, really hurt if I fall off right now. But yeah, multi-pitch climbing, where you have to do it in segments because it's so tall, is nothing. It's incredible. It's like a proper journey, and that's what I like. That's why I like long challenges, because you get that sense of adventure. It's like you're going somewhere. You're going on a journey. It's going to take a while to get there. It's going to be a long achievement, and you're probably going to have lots of type 2 fun where you wish you weren't there. But at the end of it, you're like, oh god, man, that was so cool. I'd so do that again.
We spoke about lockdown a little bit earlier on. We alluded to it with the scenes at Snowdon. You run as well. Has that been useful, especially in the last year?
So I only started running in lockdown part 1. So you weren't allowed to climb. You were only allowed an hour of exercise a day. And we were in the shielding category, and I was like, oh my god, what am I going to do? I want to eat cake. I need to move. I can't just sit in. And Chris, my partner, he's a good runner, and he's done ultras in the past, and he would start to run again. I was like, maybe I should take up this running thing. The most I'd ever done was like 3 weeks of couch to 5K post transplant, basically just to get me moving. And I've always deemed running as the worst sport on the planet because, well, it's hard. It's hard work. And I was like, right, no, I'm gonna give this running a go. Yeah, I'm gonna do it. So I remember my first run was 1.8K, and it took me about 25 minutes. I'm pretty sure you can walk it in that. We did live in quite a hilly area. I'm gonna throw that out there. You know, it was quite a hilly area, but it was still 1.8K, and it took me a really, really long time. And I remember getting back and being like, that wasn't fun. And I was like, no, I'm gonna stick with it, because you can't just be good at running. You can't, like, unless you've got like a background in really heavy cardiovascular sport, like, I don't know, cycling and stuff. You can't just be good at running. So I was like, right, I'm gonna do this. I was like, I've got no choice because I've got nothing else to do. So 3 days a week, I dragged myself out of that house. I hated it. I hated every second of it. And 1.8K turned into 2.6K, which turned into 4K. And then I did my first 5K. My first 5K took me 45 minutes. Yeah, it did. It did. And I was so proud of myself. I didn't know anything about pace at that point. I didn't know what people did 5K in. I just knew that I'd ran 5K, and I was like, I am a ninja. I am incredible. Usain Bolt, like, look at me. I can run 5K. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to do this. I'm going to keep going. I was like, I'm going to set myself a goal. I'm going to set myself a lockdown goal of running 20K before the end of lockdown, or when lockdown ended and you were allowed to go a bit further. I was gonna run 20K, and in my head I was like, no, you're not. That's a stupid idea. But no, I did, and I dragged myself out 3 times a week, and 3 times a week turned into 4 times a week, and my 5K went from 43 minutes to 23 minutes to not 23 minutes to 33 minutes to sub 30 minutes. And then I ran my first 10K and I was like, oh my God, I'm a wizard. And I'd never felt so proud of myself. And it was so hard work, but I'd get out rain or shine and I would bloody do it. And it didn't matter how long it took me. I'd walk bits, I'd run bits, I'd walk bits, I'd run bits. And eventually the running became to the point where I was enjoying it because I was fit enough to enjoy it. And in between that is me crying and sobbing and I can't do this. God, I'm so rubbish. Because Chris would come out and run with me, and I would be running like 8-minute kilometers. Like that's not really running; it's like shuffling. And he can quite easily run 5-minute kilometers, 4.5-minute kilometers. And he'd just be like, "It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how fast you go. You're out." And I'm like, "But I'm so rubbish." But you can't just be good at running. And he would tell me that over and over again. And I'm like, "But I want to be good." So I put the effort in and I kept going. 4 times a week turned into 5 times a week. And I did my first half marathon at the end of lockdown when you could travel and when you were free to move about. My parents met me at the end of my half marathon and I ran it. And I remember at the end of it, I was like, yeah, boy, that was great. I was like, oh, yeah, I'm going to eat so much pizza. It's not even going to be funny. And I was like, I got home and I booked my first ultra. I was like, yeah, I could do more than this. And I don't want to do a marathon because with a marathon, everyone's like, oh, what time are you in for? Or how fast are you going to run it? Or, which marathon are you going to do? Oh, I've done that marathon. I did it in this, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, nah, I don't want that. I am not a fast runner. I'm still not a fast runner. I was like, I'm going to do an ultra instead because that's not just about eating really, really well. Like, can you eat for 55 kilometers and not throw up? Yes, I can give this a go.
I googled that when I saw you were going to do it. It's a long way.
Yeah, it is quite a long way. And there's
And on the hills.
Yeah, ultras are massively variant. You can get as long as it's over a marathon, it's an ultra. So you could do 27 miles and it's an ultra, even though a marathon's only 26.2. So this is my first one's 33 and a bit miles, I think. And it's not too much, there's not too many hills in it. The second one is 55k, so about the same in miles, and is about Snowdon and a bit worth of elevation gain. So it's quite a lot. But yeah, so I can go out and run, 25k just on an afternoon, like no problem. I'm still not a fast runner. I will never be a fast runner. It's just not me. Like my half marathon time, quite comfortably, is 2:10, 2 hours and 10 minutes. And I know that I can run faster than that, but I like plodding. I like being able to breathe. I like eating snacks and I like listening to my podcasts. And that's what it's about for me. I'm not there to break any records. I love it. It clears my head. It's like a brain dump on the road. And yeah, I truly do love every second of it. And I had some injury time as well. Like I got a bit injured, I think just from increasing load, even though I was trying to be really careful with it. So I took some time off, and getting back into it I thought was hard because unlike most runners, like people that have ran for 20 years, if you take a month off, you're probably not going to notice that much of a drop in your aerobic capacity, maybe some in your muscles. You will be a bit more tired and your legs will feel a bit tighter, but with 20 years of backup fitness on you, you're not going to notice it, or even 10 or even 5 years. Whereas me, I've not even been running a year. So when I took 2 months off pretty much, I noticed it. I noticed it hard. It came back quickly, but it was hard getting back into it, and I did want to just give it up. And I was like, I'm just back. I felt like I was back to the beginning, and I wasn't at all. I wasn't running 9-minute kilometers anymore. So, and yeah, I have a coach now, just to give me a bit of variation, and she's phenomenal. Her name's Carla, and she is like a machine. That woman is a machine. She just ran 100k in 8 hours.
Wow.
Um, She ran from Land's End to John O'Groats as well, and she broke the Guinness World Book of Records for the fastest time on foot from one end of the country to the other. She is a legend, and she inspires me so much. And I was like, yeah, I want this lady to coach me because she's cool and she likes cake. Um, so yeah, so I'm loving it even more now because there's somebody else writing my sessions, and it's different. It's nice. Um,
Someone else there as well.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Someone else for me to cry to and go, "Oh, this was awful. Don't ever make me do that again." Um, so yeah, it's fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to my first race, and I really hope it goes ahead. And I'm not going for any particular time. I just want to run it well. I just want to run it comfortably, and I just want to eat a massive slice of cake at the end of it.
It shows you determination going from not running to doing these ultra marathons. And I've said it, I've noticed it, and a few other people who've been on here have said it before. Post transplant, it does seem hard to get fit again. Did you notice that at the start?
Yeah, I did. I did and I didn't. I think I was out after my transplant and after I was kind of mobile. I was out every day because I've been sat on my arse basically for 2 years doing nothing, watching all of my friends climb and mountaineer and everything. And I was like, nope, nope. I'm done with that. I'm done with sitting down. This is my time. I'm gonna use my 28% and I'm gonna use every percent of it. And so I did, yeah. It was hard in the beginning coming from nothing. But especially with the running, I found it really tricky. But it just took time. It took patience. It took patience and trust in the process. Even with the climbing, like, you know, luckily I've got a lot of muscle memory when it comes to climbing. I build up muscle really fast. So I got stronger I got stronger quick, um, but you do lose it quick as well. I didn't find it any different post transplant getting fit again, but I don't think I was I'd been so unfit for so long that I hadn't had anything to compare it to. I just knew that I felt great now and terrible before.
Yeah, I noticed I had a drop off. 6 months. It was not until 6 months after mine that I got back into cricket again, and I'm all right in the short distance, short sharp bursts, and then a little bit of a rest. A short rest. This lockdown, I've been in the garden, which is about the size of a cricket, about 22 yards long, and I could sprint up one end, walk back, sprint just in that short time, but maybe 3-4 seconds off, and then sprint again. But the continuous running, I struggle to do that far.
Yeah, I think it's conditioning as well, isn't it? Like, it's just getting your body used to that again. I mean, for me as well, like walking up the stairs was bloody hard work at the start. And I remember the first hill that I walked up post transplant, the first mountain, and I was like, whoa, I really, really need to work on this because I am so unfit. But then when I compare it to how I felt, I still felt way fitter. So yeah, it's quite difficult. But now I've never been this fit in my life. I have never been able to run ever. Not that I've tried, but I've never been this fit. Um, and I've never felt this healthy, and I've never ate this well, even with the cake. Um, Kidney disease, kidney failure, and transplant has yeah, this is why I would never take it back. I've learned so much about myself, so much about my body, so much about people in general, and just the value of life and living it how you want to live it and not being miserable. And if you want to go and do something, just go and do it. What's the worst that could happen?
I completely agree. I think everything you've talked about today, all the way through from your transplant at the start, through all the sports that you do, just shows the determination, reflects that all the way through. So the determination to bounce back from the first traumatic transplant, and then the time you spent in ICU and not being able to walk or stand up, being pushed around a wheelchair, and then determined again. Now you're running ultramarathons, and then you're determined again to help other people. So we talked about camping at the start. Do you want to explain for people who are not in that area what it is and how you got involved with it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started off with the whole patient advocacy thing with shared care at the Royal, basically getting patients to do their own dialysis, um, to have them to get them to have a little bit more control of their life. When you are a patient, especially on dialysis, you lose a lot of that control. And then Camkin came along, and it was an idea set up by Salford Uni, by a lady called Christina and a gentleman called Rob. Um, and it was basically it started in Manchester. So there's a Greater Manchester Kidney Information Network, which is a Facebook group, and it's a Twitter, and there's a website, and it's about local patients being in a group. And because I find with bigger groups like that have got thousands and thousands of members, there's so much contrasting information. There's so much sometimes false information, and it can be really overwhelming. If you've got a local group of patients that might all attend a similar hospital or have been to a similar hospital, it's a lot easier to get that information. And then they approached Liverpool Hospital with an idea to set up another group. So Camkin was born, so the Cheshire and Merseyside Kidney Information Network. Again, we're a Facebook group. We've been growing exponentially in the last few weeks, especially over lockdown. There's just shy of 300 members. Doesn't sound a lot, but it's a good number of people, and we're still growing. And it's a direct line to the medics at the hospital. I run the group, I moderate the group, I pass all the information that I get directly from the medics to the people in the group, so they get that information, particularly at the minute about like vaccines and COVID, etc. It's a place for people to chat. It's a place for people to talk. It's a place for people to ask questions and tell their problems. And if they've got issues, they can come to me and we can try and sort them. We used to go out for coffee and cake when the world was normal, because everybody loves cake. And then I set up from that the healthy eating club with our dietitian Hilary, just to kind of get people out of those lockdown habits, getting eating a bit healthier and stuff. So Camkin has been phenomenal. Like, it's kept me focused, and it only started when I had my transplant, but it's nice to be able to give that. I can help give advice. I can make sure people are doing all right, and I think that's the most important thing. And it's a great group, and if you are in that area, whether that's Manchester or Cheshire and Merseyside, you're very welcome to join either group. And it's just a nice support network. It's somewhere to go when you're just not quite sure, or you need a pick me up, or you need to see some cat photos.
It's been a useful group to be in, and there are a lot of cat photos. I'm not in that area anymore, but the last 2 years where I've been in and around that area, it is useful to see, even when people just mention things that's gone on in their life. I know you don't always want to compare, but if it is on a transplant kidney front, you can say, oh, there's someone else going through what I'm going through.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you know if other areas have got similar groups?
So in terms of that particular group, like a kidney information network run by kind of us guys, not at the minute. It is a plan, hopefully, to further develop it into other areas, so that each area has a local group. There are other groups about. So if you obviously Kidney Care UK is a massive network, and they have their website and they have a Kidney Care Facebook group, but that is not moderated in terms of the content on there. So because there's thousands and thousands and thousands of members on there, it can be useful, but it can also be a bit detrimental if you're not quite sure what kidney disease is about yet. If you're very new, it can be really overwhelming. There are local kidney patient associations in quite a lot of areas. The best thing to do is have a look online. Um, if not, if you're struggling and you need advice, if you get in contact with myself on Camkin, then I can always direct you to your local kidney patient group, or try and find one for you. Because I get that people need that support.
It's always useful to hear from other people in the same position, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
And other than camping, which you've been heavily involved with, you've done a lot of fundraising, which I've seen a bit of online. So your main charities, are they the Liverpool Transplant Initiative and Kidney Care UK?
Yeah. So oh, well, the plan was last year was to summit Elbrus. So Mount Elbrus is the highest mountain in Europe, and it's also one of the 7 summits. It's just over 6,000 meters. Um, so I was going to summit that and raise money for those two charities that you said then. But obviously, COVID didn't happen. Fundraising now is difficult because nobody's in a good position, and you can't get out and do things. But I thought, "Oh, what can I do? I still want to start raising money. I still want to do that expedition, but God knows when it's going to happen." The Liverpool Transplant Initiative is set up by the Royal, the surgeons in the Royal, and they go over to Gaza and they perform transplants on um, the patients there because they don't have a transplant system. They did the first ever transplant there back, I think it was the early 2000s, and they've been doing them ever since. I'm talking everybody, children, elderly people, young people, dads, mums, cousins, uncles, aunties, everyone. And they do as many as they can, and they train up local medics and they train up more surgeons to try and carry on that work. And without it, Gaza wouldn't have any transplants. That's the sad nature of it. It's a beautiful charity, and whatever I can do to help them, I definitely will. And then Kidney Care UK, you know, they're a much larger charity, a much more national charity, but they do some incredible work. Things like the young adult kidney group, they do like a Mount Cook weekend where they go in and do activities for the week. And for some weekend, and for some patients, might be the only time they ever get to do those activities, climbing and paddling, and getting out and meeting other people, and that is priceless for some people. So those are the two charities I've been fundraising for. So in early December, I shaved off my dreadlocks of nearly 7 years to raise money, and I think I raised about over £3,000, which was amazing. My target was 2.5 grand to shave them off, and obviously,
Smash that.
yeah, absolutely smash that. So hopefully in the future I can do some more fundraising events. But at the minute, I get that it's difficult, and it's really hard, for people to be able to donate.
I think with the Liverpool Transplant Initiative, I think we might have had the same surgeon. I think, yeah,
Mr. Hamad,
yeah. So
yeah.
he's good.
Do you know what? He is a lovely, lovely man, and what he's set up is truly brilliant. And um, I just hope that the charity can carry on and they can keep doing the good work when COVID is kind of settled down. Because if there wasn't a transplant system, then there's definitely not going to be one now with what's happened. So yeah, and I think obviously at some point Mr. Mad is going to want to pass the baton on to another surgeon in the Royal and getting them trained and taking them over and stuff. So all of the money will go directly to that charity, and you can find more information about it if you just type in the Liverpool Transplant Initiative. It is truly, truly incredible.
Mr. Hamad is a top guy, great surgeon, great charity. Um, how can people donate to your fundraising for those charities?
So I have a GoFundMe page. So it's linked on my Instagram. Tara, I think my handle is Tara T Bash. Yep, Tara T Bash. The GoFundMe page. If you type in GoFundMe and funding kidneys, the dreaded shave, you can find the GoFundMe link there, and you can read a little bit more about the charities, and you can read a little bit more about why. So if you can make a donation, that would be absolutely phenomenal. Every penny helps, and it's just ongoing. It's just ongoing fundraising.
I'll share it in the show notes of this. I'll put it on the posts that come out when this is released. So hopefully
Amazing.
more people can see it. Donate some money to everything you're doing, and hopefully your expedition goes ahead in the not too distant future. Thank you so much for coming on, Tara. I'm sure people are going to find what you've said very useful and inspiring, because you have been through a lot over the last few years, and it's still at a very young age, which must be a lot to go through and a lot to deal with.
Yeah, I think that it's made me like internally really old, health wise and mental wise. But yeah, as I said, like it's been a serious roller coaster of events. But I honestly wouldn't change it. I think I'd change the impact it had on my family. I think that was pretty traumatic for everybody. But for me personally, it was life changing, but in some ways for the better, I think.
Couple more things before we wrap this up. Um, of the many different things you've done, do you have an achievement you're most proud of? Sporting and maybe not sporting?
Oh God. You know, I was thinking about this the other day and trying to pinpoint one thing is really difficult. Um, I think that the the proudest moment for me was probably was probably doing my first half marathon actually. It was one of the proudest moments I think I ever had. Um, and in terms of not sporting, um, when I was part of the shared HD group, um, we did a gala, like a ball, and we managed to raise like £10,000 for shared care at the Royal, and they called me up on stage and gave me a bunch of flowers, and I was just like, "Yeah, I've done something." I baked a lot of cakes, but that was quite proud for me as well. I think yeah, just everything that I do, I try and I put my all into because what's the point in doing it otherwise? But yeah, there's been so many moments. It's really hard to nail down a few. I think, but yeah, I think those two are quite good.
I'd agree. I think you can be really proud of everything you've done through your transplant, your climbing, all your expeditions abroad, and now everything you're doing for other people in this country and abroad with the transplant initiative. One more question before we go. What's one piece of advice you'd give to someone facing a transplant?
um, take it as it comes. I think take every step as it comes, and there will be highs and there will be lows. It doesn't matter if you have the most successful transplant on the planet or it goes absolutely pear-shaped. Use your transplant well. Appreciate every single day that you have it, and don't be worried about living your life because of the risks that might be associated with it. You've got to go forth and have fun.
There we go. Tara, it's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast. If you're listening, please go and check out the charities and donate if you can. I'll link them all in the show notes, so they'll be above, below, somewhere on the page you're listening on. Uh, Tara, thanks again. I've been Lewis Daniels, and you've been listening to Transplant's Take on Sport.